So you just watched a tornado shot guide and you're excited. You study a new character, ready to go on the greatest adventure of your time, wrecking all content and impressing your dear Nisa. But then it starts. You keep on dying and you don't know why. I mean, whatever you do, it doesn't work. You don't understand. I mean, you follow the guide and you've put in all of your currency, but you keep on dying and you keep on doing absolutely no damage. So you start telling yourself, maybe it was a bad decision. Maybe these guides are lying to you and that bow characters suck and that they're squishy and that they deal no damage unless you have to remortgage your hideout to be able to afford a multi-mirror build. But then you stumble across this video. I mean, how could you have missed it? You start understanding it all. Why you keep on dying. Why you deal no damage. Why she left you for him. Why daddy went to grab milk. You don't need currency. You don't need to play the game 5,000 hours. You'll finally able to impress your dear Nisa. Yes, all you needed was this video. And after watching it, you can finally make the build of your dreams. Hey guys, Mikoshi here. The rest of the video will have a more serious tone, obviously. You're not going to watch a 50-minute video about just memes. This video is a guide on the tornado shot build. It's the variant I like to play and which I think is best. I will try to make this guide slightly different than most guides on YouTube on the tornado shot build, as I find that they have many problems, such as often they showcase actually bad builds that do not reflect the true essence of the tornado shot Deadeye. Especially higher budget ones, I think that for the amount of currency that are invested, they often do not reflect whatsoever the actual power of the build. And for the lower budgets, I find that often the lower budget differs so much from mid to higher budget tornado shot builds that often players don't really understand what actually is the tornado shot and what makes this skill so great and how to scale it up. They also don't really try to make you understand often how the build works. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about every single guide, but I think that often they just ask you to mindlessly follow their POB. And if you do that, well, you don't really understand the build, which is really hard. Example, if you're on a lower budget or if you're on a higher budget trying to make your build stronger, right? So this guy will explain how the build works, how to scale huge amount of DPS, and it's going to go over pretty much every single mod on this build, every single item in this build that is, I find, very important. If you're on a budget, obviously this build is a very high budget one. It's a 3-mirror build, I think, but I'll be giving the mods will be listed in order of importance, which means you'll be able to sacrifice not so important mods for those important mods, which will be great for your budget. Now, obviously, I will be talking about the Omniscience one. So I think the Omniscience usually sells for, I guess, 10 Divine. So if you're lower than the 10 Divine budget, maybe I will make a video afterwards. But I still suggest you do watch this video, as it explains very well, I think, how to scale a huge amount of damage, whether you're a Omniscience build or not. Even if you don't play Tornado Shot, I think it's a pretty important one. And yeah. This is my second video on YouTube, so I mean, it might not be the greatest video ever, but if you have any questions or criticism, please let me know in the comments down below. Have a nice one. Alright, so step number 1, we need Omniscience. What is Omniscience? Omniscience is your amulet, and it's the most important aspect of your build. What does Omniscience do? It gives you elemental resistance and elemental penetration, which are both very important, and change your basic stats by attributes, and they transform it into Omniscience. So this is what Omniscience looks like. It got nerfed, so it's 15 Omniscience and not 10 Omniscience. It's still very strong. It transforms all your attributes into Omniscience, which means you will have only the basic attributes that come with your character creation. For us, it's going to be 14 Intelligence, 14 Strength, and 32 Dexterity. Now, we will still be able to have items and level up our gems because all of our attributes are transformed into Omniscience, and our items can be satisfied with only Omniscience. So why is it so strong? Well, because it really gives you the 1% elemental penetration. So if nobody, if so to give you an example, if you have 100 damage with 0 elemental penetration, and you do 100 damage to an enemy with a 0% resistance, you'll be doing 100 damage. But if that enemy has a 50% resistance, then you'll only be doing 50 damage. Now, if you had a good amount of elemental penetration, so if you're able to penetrate 100%, not 100% elemental penetration, but if you're able to penetrate 100% against an enemy that has 50% penetration, you'll be in the end doing 150 damage instead of 50, and basically tripling your damage, which is very strong. Another reason why it's so strong is because it gives you elemental resistance. And why is that so strong? Because a single mod on an item can give you a defensive and an offensive mod, which means, example, most items only have 6 mods. You'll be able to, usually you have 3 defensive mods and then maybe 3 offensive mods. Well, this one you'll have 3 defensive mods, and because 3 of the defensive mods also count as offensive, you'll basically have 3 defensive mods and 6 offensive mods for only 6 mods. Which is also a very important aspect that often we don't think about when we use Omni Signs, but is very useful. Now, why Tornado Shot? Tornado Shot is the main skill gem of the build. It has high DPS, and very, very good clear. Now, what's important to note, okay, this is the basic Tornado Shot. It's very bad, just basically, if you just use the skill gem by itself. It shoots an arrow that then transforms into a tornado, and the tornado also shoots 3 additional secondary projectiles. What's important to note is the first arrow and the tornado itself does not deal damage. The only thing that deals damage are the little arrows that are shot afterwards. Now, why Tornado Shot? Because it scales extremely well with extra arrows. Let's use the example of greater multiple projectile support. A single tornado shot will shoot 1 primary projectile. It will transform into a tornado and then shoot 3 projectiles, 3 secondary projectiles. But if we have +4 arrows, we then shoot 5 primary arrows, so 5 tornadoes, and the 3 secondary projectiles also have the +4 arrows. So that means instead of +4 arrows, we actually have +32 arrows. So it will make your main skill look from this to this, and here you can see there's hundreds of arrows that are shot. So they're very strong, very good clear. It looks cool and does a lot of damage. So that's why we'll be using Tornado Shot. Now, why physical to cold conversion? I'm not a mathematician, okay? I'm not gonna start giving big explanation, but many variants will use the elemental DPS and will use Trinity. But if you want to reach higher heights, I do suggest you go physical to cold conversion. And you can just see by PoE ninja builds the amount of DPS you can do with a physical to cold instead of a elemental DPS. Huge difference. Now, obviously, the first like 10 are usually not very viable. So if you go in the average maybe, or like a bit lower, you have in the 70 millions, right here you have in the 10 millions. And to be honest, 10 million an arrow isn't that much DPS, considering our class is supposed to be one of the highest output DPS possible. So that's why I suggest you go physical to cold conversion. Now, why I suggest that, it's often people would disregard the importance, disregard the DPS. A lot of players, I don't know, they've played maybe tankier builds. They don't really have the great understanding of what a actual arrow build is supposed to be. The ranger build is always low HP, high damage. It doesn't necessarily need to be glass cannon, but it's an archetype that you can see in pretty much any role-playing game. It's always that. You shoot from far, you have almost no HP, but you do a huge amount of DPS, and it's the same exact thing in Path of Exile. Now, let's do a little example of that. Example, I have 100 HP and I do deal 100 damage per second. I fed a boss that has 200 HP and deals 200 damage. The boss will die in 2 seconds, but I can also die right if he hits me. Now, example, I double my HP, so I have 200 HP and I only deal 66.6, so a 2/3 of my DPS originally. The boss has 200 HP, deals 200 damage. The boss dies in 3 seconds, but I have a higher risk of death, right? Because it's important to understand that our class is limited in terms of HP that you can get. So even if we're able to double our HP, we still have a higher risk of death because it takes more time to kill the boss or big enemies. Now, example, I lower a bit my HP, so I go from 100 to 75, but I deal 250 damage per second, while the boss has 200 HP, deals 200 damage. I also get one tap, but the boss dies in less than 1 second, right? So it's important to know that we are limited in defenses, but not in DPS. We're really not limited in DPS, so we have to use that at our advantage. Now, the physical to cold conversion. It's important to note that you have to reach 100% physical to cold conversion. Once you're able to run physical reflection maps, you know that you did it well. How to reach that? We have 40% in our passive tree. So in the cold mastery right here, we have 40% of physical damage converted to cold damage. And then the rest will be thanks to our gloves. We need the 30% or 25 depending implicit. So here, this is an example of my gloves. And then our explicit will take care of the rest. So on our gloves, well, on my gloves, I have 64 plus the 40, so that's 100. And that's how we get our 100% physical to cold conversion. Now, quick explanation on how to unlock high DPS thanks to that. At Hatred at level 20 will give you a 25% physical damage as extra cold damage. And that's really good, right? Because it's a free 25% DPS. I do 100 fizz plus the Hatred. I basically do 100 fizz plus 25 cold, so 125 damage. Now, if you have... It's important to know that the additive will also get multiplied after. So example, I have a 50% increased cold damage and a 50% increased elemental damage. I basically have like 100% increased elemental damage. Well, my Hatred will get the plus the 25 extra damage will get the 100% increase. So I'll be doing 150 DPS. And then after that, on our chest, we would like to have the Hatred has increased effect and the effect of non-curse auras. On the chest example, we can reach 50. Instead of doing then 25 damage and 150, 50, sorry, we'll be doing 37.5, and then we have the 100% increased. So our end damage will be 175. So our DPS goes up by 75% with a single aura. Hatred is the most important aura in pretty much like every single cold damage build. And yeah, so very important. You can get that very, very low level. And yeah. So now if we add the Hatred and the cold conversion, it's important to understand that Hatred will get your physical before it gets converted. So to give you the example, we'll take off the increased effects so the maths are easier. We saw our example, if we have Hatred with our increased elemental damage, we get 150 DPS. Now if we add the cold conversion, we have 100 fizz plus the Hatred. So that means it's 100 cold plus the 25 cold. And then you have the 100% increased cold. So it's 125 plus 125. Basically 250. So the cold conversion literally doubles our DPS almost. And by the end, we'll have 250 cold DPS instead of 100 fizz. As we've seen, it multiplies a lot. So that's why it's really important to scale our physical damage. And so we'll look for pure physical increases on our bows and quivers, okay? You don't want to look for increased elemental damage. You don't want to see added cold damage and stuff like that. Now, obviously, this bow is a merit tier bow, but it gives you the great example of what you're trying to look for. And here you have physical attack speed, obviously, physical attack speed, additional arrows. So basically, our only DPS things we want is really physical and obviously our attack speed. Now, as I said, you probably won't reach those amount of numbers, right? It's a huge amount of currency needed, but you'll very easily be able to reach millions of DPS per arrow. Now, if we use high DPS with Omni Science, example, I do 275 cold DPS and I have a zero penetration against an enemy that has 1000 HP with a 50% res. Basically, I'll do 137.5 damage per second against him, taking 7.3 seconds to kill. Now, if I double my DPS and I have still no elemental penetration against the same enemy, it will take me 3.6 seconds to kill. Now, if I had my normal DPS, which is 275, and I have a 70, and I penetrate, okay, it's important to understand that you penetrate 75% and not a 75% penetration against the same enemy, it will take me 2.9 seconds to kill. And that shows that elemental penetration is really strong, and you can scale a stupid amount of damage against enemies. There comes attack speed. Attack speed is pretty simple to understand. If I do 100 damage per attack and I attack once per second, I do 100 damage per second. If I do 100 damage per attacks and I attack twice per second, I'll do 200 damage, right? Now, obviously, it's almost impossible to get double the amount of attack speed and keep the same amount of damage per attack. So you're probably going to have to prioritize a higher attack damage, and then attack speed will come with better gear. But it's also important to understand that attack speed is really strong. Now, how to make that high DPS, crazy DPS? You'll need the critical chance and the critical multiplier. So, if in case you forgot or something, the critical strike chance is the probability of you dealing a critical strike, which is an attack that deals more damage than the normal one, and the amount of damage that the critical strike deals are based on the critical strike multiplier, which multiplies the base damage of the attack when a critical strike is dealt. Sorry for the bad English. If a normal attack deals 100 damage and you have no crit, that's 100 damage. Now, if I do a crit attack, but I have 0 multi, for example, I'll only be doing 100 damage. Now, if I do a crit attack and I have a plus 50 to multi, usually we already have base multi, we'll be doing 100 damage plus the 50%, so it'll be 150 damage. Now, our goal is going to be a 100% crit chance, which means every single attack we always do will always have a crit multi. So our first goal will to increase the crit chance and then the crit multi afterwards. And to give you an example, if I do 100 damage basically and I have a 100% crit chance and I have a plus 100 multi, I'd be dealing 200 damage every single attack, doubling my DPS basically. And same thing, if I have a plus 250, it goes to 350, and if I have a plus 500, I go to 600 damage. So instead of doing a basic 100 damage, I do 600 damage. Now, it might change in the game, right? Math is a bit more complicated than that, and I don't have a super deep understanding of the math behind PoE, but this is a pretty good example of how crit and very high crit multi can make your DPS huge, basically. Now, if you add all of what I've explained, for a basic 100 fizz, you have Hatred, Fist of Cold, Elemental Penetration, crit, let's say plus 300 crit multi, and then the attack speed, we go from 100, 250, 343, 1000, up to 1200. So we're basically multiplying our DPS by 12 with just what I've explained if you're able to reach those heights, which aren't really complicated whatsoever. Now, is this the secret to billions of DPS? Absolutely not. Now, when I talk about billions of DPS, I'm talking about with all the arrows, obviously. Obviously, no. You're still far away from that. On top of that, you're going to have to add Rage. Rage, we'll be able to reach Rage with our implicit gloves, right? The gain 1 Rage on hit with attacks no more than 1 per number of seconds. So it can be from 0.7, I think, to 1.2. That means usually you're going to have to hit 2 enemies in the amount of seconds that's needed to be able to gain the amount of Rage, 1 Rage per that second. So let's say 1 second. And what does Rage do? Our cap is 50 Rage, so we have 1% increased attack damage per 1 Rage, 1% attack speed per 2 Rage, and 1% movement speed per 5 Rage. So at 50 Rage, we'll be doing 50% increased attack damage, 25% attack speed, and 10% movement speed, which is very good, especially when you're mapping. It will make you stronger the more enemies you kill. But most importantly, it's really good if you're able to unlock a thing called Berserk, because Berserk will require at least 5 Rage to start Berserking, and that thing will unlock a huge amount of DPS. That's a plus 40% DPS by itself, no matter what, because it says 20% more damage and 20% more attack speed. So if you know Path of Exile, you know that more is a additive DPS instead of a multiplier. That means it's all your buffs and then you add 20% extra. And it's really strong because it doesn't last long, right? Because you lose a lot of Rage per second, but it gives you a huge amount of burst DPS. And once you reach the boss, for example, you pop the Berserk and the boss dies. To give you an example of when you're Berserking, you have 200 million per arrow, we're talking. A single arrow will do 200 million damage. If you take off the Berserk, you reach 135 only. So very, very, very strong. Now, Blood Rage and Frenzy charges. Blood Rage, pretty simple. You have a 15% increased attack speed and you get Life Leech. Now, obviously, our physical damage, we won't be leeching, sadly, because we do 0 physical. So it's really important. The reason we use Blood Rage is the increased attack speed, but also the 25% chance to gain a Frenzy Charge on kill. What a Frenzy Charge does, it's 4% increased attack speed per Frenzy Charge and 4% more damage per Frenzy Charge. The normal limit of a player usually is 4 Frenzy Charges, so that's basically 16% more attack speed and 60% more damage, which is huge. So basically a 16% DPS increase. And that's how you're able to generate Frenzy Charges while you're mapping. Now, another way of generating Frenzy Charges against bosses when there's no little minions around, you have a 10% chance to gain a Frenzy Charge when you hit a marked enemy. That's a mastery. Once you shoot 14 arrows per second, you basically get your maximum cap Frenzy Charge very quickly. Also, there's the Frenzy setup with the Mana Forged arrow. It performs an attack that gives you your character a Frenzy Charge if it hits. And yeah, basically that's how you can generate Frenzy Charge. We'll get back to the rest later. Now the marks, the curse on hit support. The marks, they're a type of skills, right? They're a subset of curses and they share the same curse cap with hexes. So we usually have only one, we're only able to get one mark. And we will be using the Sniper's Mark. It says cursed enemies take 35% increased damage from projectile hits. So that's basically a 35% increased damage, basically. And if you get the ascendancy point, the 75% increased effect of your mark, this reaches 46% around. So that's a 46% increased DPS, as you can see. If you don't have the mark, you only do 112 million. Well, if you do the mark, you do 201 million. So that's a huge DPS bonus. And it's the same thing. If you do 1,000 damage with the mark, you'll be doing around 1,800. So it doesn't scale with huge amount of DPS. It scales with any amount of DPS. Now, with those tips, couples of millions are really easy to reach. But if you're really trying to like do a stupid amount of DPS and try to flex your POB with your friends, there's a single item that can like double, even triple your DPS actually, and it costs nothing. Okay, it's like not even a single divine. It's a 30 chaos helmet. It's the Heat Shiver leather hood, and I'll explain to you how. We've seen how hatred is very strong, right? The gain physical as extra. Now this does the same thing but with your cold damage. So you gain 1% of cold damage as extra fire damage per 1% chill effect on enemies. And you gain 100% of cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies. That's a huge amount of DPS. You can go from 65 million to 201 million if the enemy is frozen. You're able to, it just does a huge amount of DPS, right? And the first step is to chill an enemy. You must do a lot of cold damage beforehand. And then with the hypothermia support, you have a 20% chance to freeze an enemy when they're chilled, and then unlocking the 100% gain cold as extra fire. It's also important to note that the gain 100% cold damage is with all your buffs, and then the extra fire is all your buffs, and then you can add your buffs on top of that. So example, you have all those increased elemental damage which increase the cold. Once you gain the 100% cold as extra fire, the increased elemental damage also applies to the extra fire damage. And yeah, so, and plus you have a 20% chance of the chilled enemies to become frozen. Now, let's get to the gear. So first of all, we're gonna start with the uniques. We're gonna need 3 uniques on our gear. First of all, the amulet, the Omni signs, obviously. Our helmet is going to be the Heat Shiver or Shiver leather hood. And then if you have the budget, Mage Blood, obviously, take off the space. Very strong. Why Mage Blood is so important? It's because there's so many things with your flask that you can achieve, right? And not having to put skill points or other mods on your gear to be able, example, reach movement speed, right? Because on pretty much only our boots have movement speed, right? And we're supposed to be a very fast character, right? So if we had to add movement speed on every single one of our items, we would be losing a huge amount of DPS. Also, our flask will be able to have the 70% increased effect, gain no charges during flask effect enchant, which is huge because it increased the effects of each flask by 70% with no drawback whatsoever. It's important to note, sorry, that the list of mods will be listed in order of importance. Okay, so the top one is more important than the second one, and then the second one is more important than the third one. On our chest, we want the hatred and non-cursed aura effect implicits, a huge amount of DPS. And then you want the mana reservation efficiency of skills. Why? Just more auras and more heralds equals more DPS, right? Basically. And then the rest can be defensive mods. I suggest suppress spell damage, chaos resistance if possible, right? Maximum life and global defenses. The global defense is very expensive, right? So if you can do it, I suggest it, really important. If not, just get the suppress spell damage. Our bow and quiver, we want the extra arrows, really important, okay? As we've seen how well extra arrows scale with tornado shot. If I shoot a single arrow, or if I shoot 3 and 3 of them hit, right? Well, I basically triple my DPS for free. After that, we want every single physical increase possible. Increase physical, and then added physical, right? So adds this to this physical damage, add this to this physical, same thing here. You want attack speed, obviously, crit multi, especially for the quiver, and then damage with bows also with the quiver, the minus 49% increased damage with both skills. Now, obviously, I don't know about the quiver, right? But like the bow, it's like a mirror tier bow, right? You don't have to copy this, and you don't need bows like that to be able to do huge amount of DPS. Just when you want to buy bows, just try to look out for these mods. I suggest at least 1 extra arrow and a big physical increase. That will already be enough, right? And for your quiver, added physical, a multiplier, and a +1 to arrow. They're pretty easy to craft, actually, if you know what you're doing, or if you look at a video. I'm talking about the quiver, obviously. Now, the rings. Rings are probably the easiest thing to get. You need a triple tier 1 attribute. Now, I know it's not a I know this one is not a tier 1. I just didn't feel like rolling it again. You can easily make those rings for like less than 2 divines each. You get a fractured base with a tier 1. You add the quality modifier up to 20%. And then you just essence spam, pretty easy. And then you can veil chaos to get the plus life, and then non-channeling skills have something to total mana cost. As you can see, mine is not -7 as most builds, and I will explain why. I think it's really important for you not to have a free tornado shot because you get so many advantages, but I'll get back to it. The gear, the gloves. Gloves, as we've seen, is the important source of physical to cold conversion. Must be a total of 60. It doesn't necessarily need to be 30 and 30 something. It could be 25 and 35, or I don't know, whatever. Just get a total of 60 if possible. Also, the implicit, gain 1 rage with attacks. We don't really care the amount of seconds, to be honest. I mean, 0.7 is always best. After that, you want damage against chilled enemies, as we see. Yeah, I know it's written well, not well. It's really good, right? 49% increased damage. Hits against chilled enemies, that's big DPS because we chill a lot of enemies. And then attack speed, spell suppression. Our boots, we want movement speed, we want spell suppression, and then for the implicit, better off having action speed than movement speed. I just didn't roll it yet, I don't know why. And then avoid elemental ailments, so we don't get frozen, shocked, or ignited. Try to reach 100 with ailment avoidance. It makes quality of life so much better. Now our flasks, I suggest you do run a 4 magic for the mage blood, and then a single, it could be a life flask, it could be bismuth, not a bismuth, like any other unique flask, I guess, if you want higher DPS, stuff like that. When you have mage blood, I do suggest you get the 70% increased effect here. And you also have the increased effect, so that just makes your flask double the amount of effect, almost, basically. Huge, well, it's huge for you. I suggest the diamond flask for crit, a onslaught flask, so you have constant onslaught, and then you add the enchant that makes your attacks cost less mana. I'll get back to it later. A quicksilver flask with attack speed. And then the rest, the single one can, well, the 2 last ones can be changed depending on your needs, right? Example, you still need, I don't know, to have elemental capped or more chaos or whatever it is, more armor, more evasion, you can add the last flask. And these flasks can be crafted by oneself pretty easily. It's really not complicated. You shouldn't have to spend a lot of currency on that. Now the passive tree, I do suggest you copy mine. I'll get onto why. It's pretty... I think it's a very, very good reflection on what your tree should be. I'm pretty sure there's not really other ways you can make it as stronger than what it is right now. You'll need the Deadeye Ascendancy. Don't even try to do something else. Like, please don't. The amount of damage you can get from the Deadeye Ascendancy is a huge amount of DPS. You'll need Cluster Jewels, obviously. I'm not gonna explain what Cluster Jewels are. They've been there for a while. They're just like a extra creation of a tree. Watcher's Eye, Lethal Pride, Thread of Hope, and Forbidden Flesh and Flame if you have the budget by the end, okay? Watcher's Eye and Lethal Pride, they can be intertwined depending. Now for Ascendancy, Focal Point, Far Shot, Endless Munition, and Gathering Winds. Focal Point, as we've seen, huge amount of DPS. Far Shot, even more DPS. It's Far Shot, so you deal more damage the further away you are from them, which is very strong, right? Because we want to stay away from enemies. That's the purpose of a ranger build and not a melee build. So literally no drawbacks. Endless Munition, +2 arrows. That's a huge DPS boost, and there's no downside whatsoever. And then Gathering Winds, which is a other DPS boost because it gives more action speed. Now, if you have no Ascendancy, you do 83 million on my example per arrow. With the Ascendancy, you do 201, and it does not count the +2 arrows, which is huge. Passive tree, the crit family, very important. Mastery gives you huge DPS boost. Nose give you a good crit and good DPS, so get those. Increased reduction to projectile speed also apply to damage with bows, huge. This is more crit, this is more crit, this is more crit, basically. You just want to get that 100% crit chance and a huge amount of crit multi. Elemental family, you want the 40% fist to cold conversion, very important. And then the treat resistance as inverted is a huge amount of DPS. Example, I deal 100 damage against an enemy that has 50 res, I do 50 damage. Now, I have a 25% chance of the 50 res becoming minus 50 res, which is a 150 damage, 100 damage, so you triple your DPS. Now, if you add your elemental penetration with Omni, this guy's like at negative 150 or something, it's a crazy amount of DPS. The stat family, I think the only stats you're gonna need in your tree is gonna be from the attributes mastery, so more dex, and then the 5% increased attributes. That's just a lot of Omni for free. And then finally your marks and Culling Strike. Culling Strike, for those who do not know, is the moment an enemy is at 10% HP, no matter how much damage you do, he gets insta-killed. So if, example, the enemy has 10 billion HP or something, and he's down to 1 billion, so 10% of HP, and you deal a single damage, he's dead. So that's a plus 10% DPS for free, for a single skill point, basically. And that's if he's marked, but you always mark enemies. And then your mark mastery is a 10% chance to get a frenzy charge, so that's frenzy charge generation against single enemies, which is very important, right? This build is very good for map. It's literally more for mapping, but you can still do uber bosses depending which ones, and being able to get a frenzy generation it's a big boost. Accuracy is very, very important. What is accuracy? It's the main chance of hit, right? Example, I do 100 damage and my main chance to hit is 50%. My DPS will be 50 damage because half the time I'm missing. If I have a 100% chance of hitting, I have a 100 DPS, so basically any decrease of accuracy is literally as equal decrease of damage. So we'll get the plus 500 accuracy rating and the -2 accuracy rating per level, so you'll basically have 300 accuracy rating at level 100. Now, why this? Because dexterity usually gives +2 accuracy per single dexterity, but because we have no dexterity, or only 32 dexterity, because everything is transformed to Omniscience, we have there's a higher chance of us missing the hit. And an example of this is 200 million. If we take off this mastery and this whole mode, we only do 144, so that's a 25% decreased DPS. The enchant on your amulet, I suggest you get the multi-shot. It's a +1 arrow, saves us 4 passives, and that's just bigger DPS, bigger clear speed. For our cluster jewels is a massive DPS. On the 12 passive one, you want no skill, no added passive skill. You only want increased effect. Okay, huge. Instead of doing 12% increased damage, you do 16% increased damage. And then after that, you want increased attack speed, increased damage, and then a tier 1, not as important, but whatever, a tier 1 attribute, or maybe chaos res. If you have the 35% increased effect, it should read 16% increased damage with bows, 4% attack speed, 5% increased damage, 8 to strength. So that means every single passive you click has a 20% increased attack damage with a 4% increased attack speed and +10 to the attribute, which is like the best literal nodes that you can get on your trees. And then for your large and medium clusters, the large, I suggest Feed the Fury, Field of Fart, and Martial Prowess. And then for the medium clusters, Eye to Eye and Repeater. Pretty basic. I think most of the builds will run those. For the jewels, the Watcher's Eye, I suggest you find the +something% critical strike chance while affected by hatred. With all your critical chance multipliers, that's like literally a 20% of your crit. Huge. After that, you know, attack speed, critical strike chance, whatever. But really, if you try to prioritize a single one, the critical strike chance with hatred is huge. Your Lethal Pride, I think it's important, right? It gives you plus strength to everything in the radius, so that's already better Omni Science. But also it gives you a chance of getting the 5% chance to deal double damage, which is just a stupid amount of DPS. I think mine has a +20 or a +25 chance to deal a double damage. And you know, so that means a quarter of my shots don't, like, instead of doing 100 damage, they do 200. So that's a 25%. Any increase of chances of dealing double damage is a proportional increase of dealing, increase of DPS. So if I have a 25% chance to deal double damage, my DPS goes up by 25%. Now, Forbidden Flame, it's important to know that your Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh need to allocate the same thing. Okay, I see like people still doing that mistake. Not necessary. You can replace them by other cluster jewels, but if you have the currency, I suggest you get Avatar of the Slaughter. That gives you more DPS, more damage, and more movement speed per frenzy charge that you have. That's just free DPS basically. Now, our gem setup, Herald of Purity, Hatred, Awaken, Enlighten, Val Haste. Now you can change like the Herald of Purity for like a Herald of Fire, Herald of Ice if you like the MTX like effects, right? But if we're talking about pure DPS, Herald of Purity is better. Those are basically DPS auras. You want the Enlighten to be able to have reservation so you can add more auras afterwards. Now, Ensnaring Arrow, Frenzy, Power Charge on Crit, and Mana Forge Arrows. Mana Forge Arrows basically is after you spend 300% the amount of mana that the Mana Forge Arrow is supposed to cost. It will shoot the Mana Forge Arrow and will also shoot the Ensnaring Arrow. And Ensnaring Arrow, both of them have the Frenzy support, which if they hit any enemy, it gives you a single Frenzy charge, and it also gives you a Power Charge on crit, and if you crit all the time, you'll get a Power Charge, which also increases your critical strike chance and gives you more DPS per Power Charge that you have. After that, Flame Dash, Anomalous, Precision. I think Anomalous is the best one you can get. Awaken, Enlighten, and Anomalous, Blood and Sand. This is the least needed, but still very strong because it gives you a 20% increase projectile speed, and with our mastery, it basically gives 20% increased damage. So movement and more DPS. For our Mark on Hit support, we have the Sniper's Mark, the Divergent Mark on Hit. We want Enhance, which gives more quality. Blood Rage, Still Skin, and Berserk. So if you're Blood Raging, you have Still Skin on or Berserking. Once you hit an enemy, you will get the Sniper's Mark on them. That's how you get the Sniper's Mark. And that grants huge amount of DPS. Berserk, also Blood Rage, also, and Still Skin will get better survivability. Example, if you don't want Blood Rage for whatever reason, you can Still Skin and shoot. It will put the Sniper's Mark on them. And now basically our actual gem setup to do the amount of damage, we are not running a totem setup. Don't run the totem setup, please. Just more complicated, more headaches, and it's just, there's better ways of dealing more damage, right? With a single tornado shot 6-lick setup, you're still able to wreck through bosses, so it's really unneeded. You want the tornado shot? It's better off running the divergent or anomalous, but just a single tornado shot is good. Awaken vicious projectiles. A vicious projectile gives you more physical damage. Hypothermia for the 20% chance of freezing and more, and then also it gives more chill effect and longer chill duration. Awaken elemental damage. Obviously we want more elemental damage. Anomalous inspiration support, that is so important, okay? And that's why I said to not make your tornado shot free, because inspiration support requires you to spend mana. If your tornado shot costs 0, you cannot get inspiration charges. And if you have 0 and if it costs 0, you also can't use your mana forge setup. And anomalous inspiration, that is 5% more elemental damage per inspiration, and you can get 5 of them, so that's a 25% increased DPS, raw DPS, and then a 40% increased crit chance, and then the anomalous also increases your critical strike chance. Huge, basically. And then increased critical damage, right? In the beginning, I suggest increased critical strike chance to get your crit to 100. Once it's 100, you change it to crit damage for the 150 more multi. Good for DPS, basically. Now, inspiration support, you can make your tornado shot cost 1 mana, and with your mana regeneration, you'll be able to sustain it. And worst case scenario, if it's a no regeneration map, you can just take off a single support gem. It will make it free, and you can run through the map. But normally, if your tornado shot cost is from 1 to 5 mana, really good. I suggest you get the non-channeling skills have -4 to total mana cost, and then a 20 or 21% reduced mana cost of skills during effect on your whichever flask. That will make it cost 1 mana with the inspiration, obviously. And that means you can trigger mana forge because tornado shot is not free, and also get the inspiration support. That's basically it for the build. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and if you have any criticism on the video or anything that I had wrong, or just anything, any comment, just let me know, please, and it'll be a pleasure for me to answer them.